Welcome to the Therapist Book Club, where two therapists dive into their favorite books and the powerful mental health themes they uncover.
Whether you're here for literary inspiration, therapeutic tools, or just some lighthearted conversation, you've found the right place.
So get cozy and let's dive into the pages together. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Therapist Book Club with Kirsten and Tiana. We are going to talk about a good one today. And what did you call an oldie but a goodie?
Goody.
We're going to be talking about Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I know I use this a lot in my therapy practice. I'm sure you do as well. So tell us about the book.
Yes. Okay. So this is kind of it's not her first book. So it's kind of like she's got some of her old stories that she's told before kind of woven throughout, but it's kind of like a blend between a memoir and a self-helpy type thing and like Rage Against the Machine, like the patriarchy type,
Yeah.
like she tells it's like a compilation of stories from her life, and then she ties in these themes of like becoming the woman she is today and saying F you to patriarchy and all the things. So yeah. So she tells a lot of stories from her life and ties in how like it's changed her. And she has
I
a lot of really good like messages. And I think that's where the self-help type thing comes in.
I feel like I am going to be like the airhead of our crew here. I had no idea she was not like a mental health therapist reading this book.
She's probably gone to a lot of therapy.
Yes, for sure. Or her editor,
Yeah.
a lot of therapy. I don't know.
Yeah. She seems like a voracious reader as well. So it could be that she's just read a lot and that informs her life and how she sees the world. And but
Yeah.
she does she does sound like a professional, like a mental health professional in a lot of ways, in a lot of things that she's produced.
Yes. So let's dive in.
Yes. Um, Tell me what you think are some of the themes that she wants to pull out. Like, what does she want her reader to come away with knowing from this book, do you
Yeah.
think?
I think there's some big themes of authenticity.
Yes.
I mean, she opens the book with the cheetah story.
Yes.
Do
Yeah.
you want-
Do you want to recap the story?
Okay, I'll recap that. I mean, she talks about going to the zoo with her kids, and at this zoo, I can't remember which zoo it was. I think she told us, but there was an exhibit or something. I don't know what to call it, but the or a show, and the cheetahs will come out, and it's a learning experience for the kids to come and see this cheetah who is trained with a golden retriever, so you can see how fast the cheetah can run. And they train the cheetah with the golden retriever to help tame the cheetah so it's safe for interactions with the zookeepers. And so after this showing of the cheetah's speed chasing, as she talks about, they have like a little stuffed animal tied to the back of the golf cart and it goes and the cheetah chases it, and the you just see the difference, right? She said she couldn't help but see the cheetah off to the side walking along the fence, looking very agitated, like just pacing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Um, and I mean, I think we went over, you and I had talked about one of the quotes from the book, um, where she talks about if we stay, I'll paraphrase it if I can't find it really fast. Yeah, if we keep living as we are, tamed and terrified, we'll continue to live as half of ourselves. And she uses that cheetah story to kind of set up this book, right? That do you think she's specific about women? It's definitely implied, but I
No,
can't remember if she's very specific, but I think she does use anyway.
everything she does is for the girlies, though. Like her whole message is for girls and women and people who identify as female. Like
Mhm.
she's
Yeah,
very much on the girls' side
yeah.
in all of her work. So I imagine this book she was writing to us as
I was gonna
women.
say, I don't think it was explicitly implied, but I think she was not explicitly stated, but she was implying. And I use this all the time with my clients, particularly those who are women living in a traditional area, um, who are maybe exploring non-traditional roles like working outside of the home, or like um whether they want children or whether they want to go to church or whatever, right? Like,
Hobbies are, or
yes. They, and so she talks about living in the box. And this part I thought was so interesting. She talks about living in the box and how we are often reinforced, and people give us the thumbs up and make us feel so good. The more we are in the box, the better. Once we step outside of the box, we're reinforced in a way that makes it scary to get out of the box, right? That hit me as a working professional mom. I remember I read this book when I just had my first child. Um, and I would call myself a non-traditional mom anyways, having my first child at 36 years old, a geriatric at the time,
yeah.
and having had a full career beforehand. And my husband was 43 when my child was born, or our child was born, I should say, I guess.
Yeah.
um, that sometimes I feel very non-traditional in particularly being religious, you know. And I remember thinking that like the box that was given to us was and at the time I was starting my private practice too. So I was starting to be a business owner versus working for somebody else, right? And versus during that time I wasn't working part-time, which I think that if I'm just being honest, as a woman in Utah, the expectation was I would have my baby and I either wouldn't go back to work or I'd go back part-time. And while I did go back part hours and I had some days home with my baby, I wouldn't say I was part-time because other days I was working for a clinic and starting mine so I could transition out. And I remember thinking, like, would it make sense at some point? Like, what if I took this box away completely? What would my life look like? And my husband and I started exploring, like, what would it look like if I worked full time? Like, um, my husband works in road construction. And so we wondered if my ability to earn as a mental health therapist and business owner, does that outweigh? We looked at like, um, I felt like there was even some experiences with daycare versus having a babysitter or having my child watched in the home. And even I think that's part of the box because when you look at the incidences of child death in care, there are extreme, like way higher in at home childcare versus daycare centers. Um, so it was just so interesting. I love the box. I loved the permission to look outside the box and like so this is how I use it with my clients often. I will say, what if we took this box away? What if
Yeah.
we looked, so there's solutions to these problems, there's solutions to these things inside the box, and we know what those are, but like what are the outside of the box? Let's just get a full brainstorm of every option available to us so you can sit and think, yeah, that makes sense.
It's kind of like that magic wand question that we're taught in grad
Yes.
school to like ask your clients, like, if you had a magic wand that would fix this, or you could recreate the perfect world, what would it look like? That's almost the same idea of like, what does it look like outside of this box? What would
Mhm.
it be like if this didn't exist?
Yes, there is probably some social work, or it shouldn't, like a therapist student right now that's like, oh, still, I know the miracle question. Did you know they're starting to like, I was reading, this is a side note for therapy students.
Tangent.
There is some talk of debunking that the miracle question, but
I have not had great success with that
I
question.
have had good success with
Yeah.
I haven't had good success with not just the asking of the question, but then scaling afterwards. Anyway.
I often run into the barrier of clients like not even able to imagine a life outside of the box, so to speak,
Yeah.
because the repercussions would be too scary or too harmful. Like, if I get out of this box where it's safe, what would happen to me? And that barrier to like just imagining is too scary. And so there's a lot, like we have to do a lot of like grounding and like preparation to even think about that question.
Well, yeah, because think about like in that scenario, being a stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
Could you imagine like the societal pushback on that husband? Why is he not working? And I thought it was so interesting shortly after I read this book. Well, somewhere around the time, but when I was reading this book, somebody had said to me, they had said to me, "Oh, I'm so sorry, your husband doesn't make enough that you have to work." And I was like, actually, I like to work. And furthermore, I like having enough money to put a roof over my child's head. And it just, I remember reading this, some of that Rage Against the Machine kind of feeling like, when did we villainize women working outside of the home?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, actually, wouldn't I be a bad mom if I didn't have, like, if I did not go out and work to feed
And
my
yeah.
children? And, you know, like my husband and I both work together to provide for our children. I am part of that equation. Wouldn't it be worse that wasn't part of the equation? Like, I don't know. It's so interesting to me. And, you know, she talks about really living her truth because I'm like, and what if I just like my work?
Yeah. So but I think that begs an interesting question because everybody's box is going to be different. So what if you like being at home with your kids? Like what if that's not your box?
Yeah.
But what if your box is, I don't know, it could be anything. But so I think sometimes that's the harder question is like even knowing that there's a box, even knowing that you're not living your authentic life, because she speaks to, like, I don't know if it's in this book. I've consumed a lot of her content like through podcasts and stuff. So I don't know, I can't quite remember what's in this book and what's not. But she doesn't even know that she's not living authentically for most of her adult life. She doesn't even realize that, like, well, she knows something is not right, but she doesn't know what it is. And she has a hard time figuring out, like, in what ways is she being contained or tamed.
Yeah.
So I don't know that.
Let's talk about this. So for her in this book, she does talk about man, have you seen the movie Eat, Pray, Love or read that book? I just am picturing Julia Roberts or
Yeah,
whatever. Because same, right? She has this experience of like at night she would cry in the bathroom. And I'm like, they sounded the same. That was her experience. Something felt off. She
yeah.
couldn't be herself. She couldn't settle. She felt that untamed feeling, but she couldn't name it. In the end, and she comes from a very Christian household. And so her box is Christian women are married to men and they raise their children. And even if you're unhappy in your marriage, you just stay. And she changes boxes to, she finds that actually she identifies as lesbian. And well, maybe she wouldn't identify that right away, but
I
we,
don't know that she even still does. She has a hard time labeling herself even today as
yeah,
lesbian.
maybe I
Mhm.
shouldn't label her that. I should take that back. But she ends up in a marriage with a woman. Well, first step is she leaves her husband, even though I remember in the book, even though she couldn't like name exactly what was wrong, you know, and she knew, and this is one thing I really liked about the book is she was kind of authentic to like, um, so she left her husband and married a woman. And often we hear stories talk like, and everything was great. Well, actually, it did have impact on her children. Her children did have some experience of suffering. Um, and now everyone's fine. But they did have to work through her changes did impact. And I think I was glad that she brought that up because I think other moms that I work with here have that fear that they'll impact their children in such a way. Like, what if they leave their marriage they're unhappy in? Are they allowed to leave that marriage? And the reality is, yeah, children may suffer for a time during that. Is that allowed? Like, is your happiness like important enough that it warrants suffering on your children's part, you
And
know?
she makes the argument. I think she would wholeheartedly say yes because she's wanting to teach her children to live their own true authentic lives. And so, like, if the message you're trying to teach your children is you stay in your marriage no matter what, you sacrifice everything for this, then
Mm-hmm.
yes, stay.
Yeah.
She realized that she wanted to teach her kids that they have to be authentic to themselves and whatever that means. And so if she couldn't do that herself, how is she going to teach her kids to do that?
Hmm. I think that's such, and isn't that an in the box thought too, that women or mothers, and I can only speak for mothers, isn't that an in the box thought too, that like our happiness does not matter compared to our children's happiness?
Yeah.
Like,
But I think it's because we're so intricately connected to our children and like I mean, I'm only a biological mother, so like I grew my babies in my body, so I don't know what that experience would be if you were to adopt a child or foster a child, whatever. But like I feel like I am connected to them in such like a deep way that like our happiness is connected. And like in a different way, not necessarily better or worse than their father is to them. So I think there is some truth in that, but I love the message she's teaching of like if I live so authentically, even if it hurts, there's beauty at the other end of it. That's the message I want my kids to see at the end of the day. Like,
think about what you said to the impact of, and what if you are living in where you're tamed and terrified?
yeah,
What impact is
that's
that?
going to impact your kids too.
And even your partner, like we don't want to leave the partner out on this too, of like, and they deserve to be loved as a whole person as well,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I'm like it, I think she brings up some really um interesting thoughts of that box. And to me, the answer isn't that we throw the box away, because some people are happy, like um that term trad wife,
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe some, I'm like, those individuals, if they're happy living that way, and that's the inside the box thing, like awesome, live that
But
way.
I think that's why it's not necessarily about what the box is, because everyone's going to have a different box that controls them and contains them.
Well, I would say, but it does matter a little bit, because you are reinforced based on the people around you and who thinks the
Saying
box.
that's good or bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So if your box matches
Societal
what your
norms.
parents think is the right way to live, what your
That's
neighbors think is the right, that's
way easier.
way easier. But I don't think that is 100. I don't think that's high probability
Yeah.
per se.
Yeah. So there's layers to the box analogy too.
Mhm.
Like we can have our own boxes that we put around ourselves, but then society can also place boxes around us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I thought that was like my biggest takeaway, was like, yeah, what if I've been reinforced um to believe?
Yeah.
What's being reinforced in my box? And definitely the experience I got was having my child in daycare was actually not part of the box for the people around me. For me, it was actually part of my box and it was fine, right? Um, or you hear some people talk about daycare just was like a hot topic for me at that point. And I still look back and like, but why? Right? Nobody's
I
raising my child with me. I'm making these decisions. At that time, we didn't know that my daughter had the hearing experiences that she has. They were teaching her baby sign, which becomes really important when she failed all her hearing screenings, right? Like, in a way, we were really blessed by daycare, and it just so happened, and I did a lot of research to find that daycare, it wasn't like a sad thing. Daycare for us has been a happy thing. My daughter still misses her friends from there, and our childcare situation has changed now. But yeah, it's so interesting that around me, that box about daycare, I had people say, I don't know how you do it, I could never take my kid to daycare.
Yeah.
I'm like, my child actually is not harmed by daycare. She actually likes it, and so anyway, I'm like, so I think the reinforcement of the box is really important. And it is hard not to let it impact how you feel about how you're choosing to
Yeah.
live your life, right? Like, it
Yeah.
would have been easier to say, oh, you're right, daycare's so scary to everybody. So like I'll just have a babysitter. But that actually wasn't the best decision.
And I would say maybe like a comparison on my end. So we've chosen to homeschool our kids, and
Mhm.
I'm the primary caretaker at our home. So I'm like the trad wife. I'm the trad wife, and I love that for me. But I would say the box that is kind of consuming us now is this idea of homeschool. And people, I get those comments of like, how could you do that? That's like, that's too much. And that's an alternative way of schooling or educating children right now.
Mhm.
And I kind of have to battle against that sometimes. Like, am I doing the right things for my kids? Am I doing this for like a good purpose? But I do get that like community feedback of like, that's weird. Why are you doing that? That's not right. Like, you're supposed to send your kids to school. And so I have to keep coming back to like my core of why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And that's helping me to remember, like, I don't have to fit in that box of public school and I can choose to educate my kids in this way. And that's okay too.
Well, and I think this is why the memoir aspect of Untamed comes out is I can't, did you say this in this episode or just outside of this, that she was a mommy blogger?
Yeah, she
And I was
was.
just thinking about, so her box was being a mommy blogger. Well, coming out of that, most mommy bloggers are moms married to men. Um, and I wonder how fearful that must have been for her to then change to be authentic in her life and marrying, was her wife's name Abby?
She's a professional soccer player.
Yeah, so when she and Abby married, she could have been fearful that like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my career. Like, will people still
Whole
read?
book, I think it was this book that came out. Oh, maybe it was one of her other books. She had a book coming out that was, oh, it was a different book, all about her marriage as her marriage was ending. And she was trying to decide if she should still put the book out or not. And she decided to put it out anyways because it was authentic at the time that she wrote it.
Yeah.
And life circumstances had changed and her whole life was flipped upside down. But she still went through with putting the book out because it came back to authenticity. Is this true? And yes, at the time, this was true.
Imagine how scary that would be, though, right? Like putting that out. I mean, she basically came out on a big scale.
Yeah.
That would be, and so I'm like, I definitely see the memoir aspect in it for her, right? She also talks about um, a couple other topics in the
Mhm.
book. Um, Remember when she talked about the knowing or her knowing?
Yes.
Yeah, tell us about the knowing.
I don't remember the context in which she talked about it in this book, but in all of like I listened to her podcast too. And so she talks about this like it's like her like siren call, so to speak, or like the thing that she goes back to see like, am I being true to myself? And it's like a deep down gut, like
Yeah.
something she wants to ignore but can't. It's like,
Yeah.
so I,
I played that with my clients to Wise Mind in DBT.
oh yeah,
That, like
yeah.
inner wisdom of like when all things kind of align,
Mhm. I
we find our
use
knowing.
like parts work and talk about like the true self or like the core self and like all the other parts are kind of like wounded parts, but like there's a core, there's a true self underneath all of that.
So of your clients, like who do you recommend this book? Who do you recommend read this book?
Um, I guess a client who would be to the point where they know that something isn't right or something isn't jiving in their life, but they're afraid to take the step or they're afraid to like do something different or do something not mainstream. So like they're on the cusp of something, but they're still very fearful. Is I would want to give this book to them to say like, here's like an anthem of bravery. And like maybe you can borrow some of her courage while you're building yours. I don't know. What about you?
I give this to my clients who are stuck,
Yeah.
but also for my clients who are making big life transitions. So my clients who are getting divorced, my clients who are I don't know, maybe going a different route than what their family had originally anticipated for them. And those who are seeking deeper connection to like themselves, like learning to just be comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah. I think she came out with a companion journal for this
Oh,
book.
really?
I think so. And it has a lot of prompts in it that you can like dig into like your own like circumstances and like what things were you, what boxes were put on you as a child, and like what do you want to carry on and what do you want to let go of. And so there is a companion to this book where you can kind of dig into some of your own work.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it for me and my sisters and my mom one Christmas. And we were gonna do like a journal. We didn't end up doing it, but it was a good thought.
It was a good thought. So, okay, so let's end. What would you rate this book?
Um, I give it a 4.
Mhm.
Because I think it has a lot of really good takeaway messages. Um, a lot of good things that you can kind of contemplate on your own. And I think she does a good job of like a call to action, like let's do let not let it's not even a let's like you do you boo is kind of her message. Like whatever is on your heart, you go and do it and take action and like take a step forward. And I think that's really empowering. Um, I wouldn't give it a full 5 because I feel like some of the things might be hard to relate to.
Yeah.
I had a hard time relating to some of the things, but
Mhm.
what about you?
I rate it a little lower even. Oh, sorry, Glennon Doyle. I would probably give it a 3 to 3.5. And it's for that reason. I thought it was a good read. I use bits of it. I kind of felt like once you get the bits, like you could get a summary of the bits in therapy, but you don't necessarily need to read the book for it. Personally,
I think that's why I gave it higher, because I've consumed so much of her content. Like I think I've read every one of her books. I listened to her podcast, so I get like a bigger picture of her and
yeah.
get like I get it. I feel like I have a better feel for her as a person. Obviously, just whatever she portrays in her content, but
Mhm.
at the bigger picture, I like to see this transformation in her and to see that transformation is possible.
I would say my clients who have read it, some would give it a 5 out of 5.
Okay.
And I would say some would give it the same rating as I have. Because I think it can be hard to relate to, but if you relate to the story, like if you really perfectly align with the story, you're gonna feel so seen and heard. If I compared this to like Brene Brown's style of writing, and I will preface this by Brene Brown is like my goddess, but um she brings in lots of different stories, lots of different angles, and lots of different application, and this is a little bit one-sided
It is.
application. However, as a therapist, I recommend all therapists read this
Mhm.
because I think the cheetah story, the knowing, they are great for me, and they are great metaphors for me to bring into the session um to discuss like these topics also.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Okay. We'll be back for another episode
Yeah.
soon.
See you then.
Thanks for joining us on the Therapist Book Club. We hope today's conversation inspired you to explore new stories and perspectives.
Don't forget to follow us for more episodes, share your favorite books with us, and join the conversation on how books and mental health connect on our social media channels.
Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, your story matters.